Hey everyone. Before we dive into today's stories, I just want to take a moment to say a huge thank you from the bottom of my heart. We've hit 1,000 subscribers, and it's beyond anything I could have imagined. I'm honestly so overwhelmed with gratitude. Your support means more than words can express. It's because of each of you that this channel has come this far. Every like, comment, and share has been a part of this journey, and I'm incredibly thankful for it. I'm beyond excited for what's ahead, and I can't wait to keep sharing these chilling stories with all of you. You're not just subscribers, you're part of this incredible community, and I couldn't be more thankful to have you along for the ride. Now, let's jump into today's chilling stories. My name's Max Harris. I'm an Uber driver in Southern California, somewhere between the sandy beaches of Santa Monica and the sprawling urban maze of Los Angeles. I've been driving at night for a few years now, mostly to make ends meet and keep the lights on. The late night crowd can be unpredictable. Drunks, people coming home from parties, others just trying to get from point A to point B. You never really know what you're going to get when you pick someone up. Most of the time, it's easy to stay detached. But then there are nights when everything changes. This one night in particular made me rethink my whole gig. It was just past midnight, the kind of night when the city seems to exhale, taking a deep breath before the early morning bustle picks up again. The streets of Los Angeles were unusually quiet. I was parked near a gas station in a semi-decent part of town, scrolling through my phone and waiting for a ride request to pop up. When it finally did, I glanced at the details and noticed the pickup was a few blocks away, in a sketchier neighborhood than usual. Normally, I would have thought twice, but I needed the fare, and a ride's a ride, right? I turned the corner, drove a few blocks, and pulled up to the address. There was a guy standing under a flickering streetlight, the kind you see in old movies, disjointed, eerie, a bit out of place in the middle of a city that never sleeps. He was hunched over, his face obscured by the shadows, but I could tell from his posture that he wasn't exactly in great shape. He looked rough, like he hadn't slept or eaten in days. His clothes were stained, his hair matted, and there was a frantic, jittery energy about him, like he couldn't keep still. His eyes kept darting around the street, as if he was expecting someone or something to jump out at him. I thought about canceling. Maybe he was a little off, maybe just someone who had hit a rough patch. But I didn't want to judge, not without a reason. "Hey, you Steven?" I asked, lowering the window just enough to make sure he could hear me over the hum of the city. His gaze flicked toward me, and he nodded sharply, his eyes scanning the area behind me before meeting mine. "Yeah, that's me." He slipped into the back seat, and the smell hit me right away. Sweat, cigarette smoke, and something sour I couldn't quite place. It was a mix of desperation, and it made my stomach twist. "Where are we headed?" I asked, trying to keep my tone professional. He gave me an address across town, about a 20-minute drive away. It was a bad part of town, but I'd been there before. No big deal. The first few minutes of the ride were oddly silent, except for him muttering to himself under his breath. His voice was low, but there was something unsettling about the words I couldn't make out. It was almost like he was arguing with someone who wasn't there. "Everything all right back there?" I asked, glancing at him through the rearview mirror. He snapped his head up, his eyes wild and bloodshot. "Just drive," he growled, his voice tight with tension. That's when it hit me. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my bones. This guy was off, and I was starting to feel like I was in over my head, but I didn't want to make a scene. I kept my hands firmly on the wheel, my eyes straight ahead. About halfway through the ride, the atmosphere in the car grew heavier. My palms were slick with sweat, my heart rate picking up. I was trying to stay calm when he leaned forward, so close I could feel his breath on the back of my neck. "Change of plans," he said, his voice low and urgent. I blinked, feeling my pulse spike. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice tight. "I need you to take me to Nevada," he said, his eyes gleaming with a strange intensity. I froze. Nevada? That was hours away. That was outside of my service area. "Look, I can't just drive to Nevada. Just drive." His voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. I could hear it then. The soft click of metal against metal. I glanced in the mirror, my heart sinking as I saw the flash of steel in his hand. A knife. A big one. And he wasn't just holding it, he was gripping it like he knew how to use it. I felt my throat tighten. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get out of this situation, but I had to think. "Look, man, I can't just cross state lines like that," I said, forcing my voice to stay level. "I'll get in trouble," he scoffed. "You think I care about your problems? You either do what I say or you'll have bigger ones." His voice was low, menacing. I could feel my hands trembling on the wheel. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. How the hell was I going to get out of this? And then, as luck would have it, we passed a gas station. A tiny window of opportunity opened up, and I seized it. We're low on gas," I said, trying to sound casual. "If we're heading to Nevada, I'll need to fill up first." He hesitated, his eyes flicking to the dashboard. He nodded once. "Fine, but no funny business." I turned into the gas station, every muscle in my body on high alert. I parked next to the pump, my hands slick with sweat. A cop car was parked near the convenience store, and I felt a flicker of hope. This was my chance. "Stay here," he said, keeping the knife visible but lowered. "I'm watching you." I nodded, my stomach twisting. Slowly, I got out of the car, moving as casually as I could manage, hoping the officer would notice. I made eye contact with him and subtly pointed to my car. His expression shifted from neutral to alert. He started walking toward me, his hand hovering over his gun. The guy must have noticed something was up because he got out of the car too. The knife was still in his hand. "Get back in the car," he shouted, his voice frantic. But by then, the officer had drawn his gun. "Drop the weapon," the officer commanded. For a moment, everything was frozen. Time stretched out, like we were all caught in a suspended moment. And then, just like that, the guy bolted, his feet pounding the pavement. But he didn't get far. Another officer appeared from the shadows and tackled him before he could make it out of the parking lot. I stood there, frozen, watching as they cuffed him. I felt my legs shaking beneath me. One of the officers came over to me, checking if I was okay. And that's when the floodgates opened. I told him everything about the ride, the knife, the threat. Turns out the guy was a fugitive wanted for armed robbery. He'd been on the run for weeks, hitching rides and terrorizing drivers to take him wherever he wanted. I don't know what would have happened if that officer hadn't been there. Maybe I'd be writing a very different story. I try not to think about it too much, but every time I pick up a passenger now, I double-check the address, their behavior, everything. Because in this line of work, you never really know who's getting into your car. And sometimes the people you meet at night are scarier than anything you could imagine. It was just after midnight in San Diego, a city I've called home for a few years now. I was exhausted after a double shift at the restaurant, my feet aching and my mind in a fog of fatigue. The last thing I wanted was to wait around for another ride. All I could think about was getting home, stripping off my uniform, taking a long, hot shower, and collapsing into bed. When I opened the Uber app to call a ride, I didn't think twice about the driver's name or face. It was just a ride home. Who really checks those things? It was late and my brain was too fried to process the details. The car that pulled up was a dark blue sedan, nothing flashy, nothing alarming. The man behind the wheel was different from the one in the app, but I shrugged it off. He rolled down his window and asked, "For Sarah?" I nodded and slid into the back seat. At first, I didn't even notice how strange the car smelled. an overpowering mix of stale cigarettes and sweat. But then I glanced down at the seat, and I saw the rips, the worn-out patches of fabric that hadn't seen a vacuum in ages. Most Uber drivers I'd had kept their cars reasonably clean, or at least livable. But this one, it felt like it had been salvaged from a junkyard. Still, I wasn't in the mood to make judgments. Maybe he just hadn't had the time to clean. But then there was the driver himself. The app had shown a clean-shaven man, probably in his 30s, with glasses. This guy? He was older, maybe in his 50s, with gray hair that hung out from under a baseball cap and a scruffy beard. His face was weathered, like he'd been through a lot, and his eyes, they didn't exactly radiate warmth. He didn't greet me or make small talk. Instead, he just muttered, "Where to?" I repeated my address, even though it was already in the app. He grunted in acknowledgement and pulled away from the curb, the car lurching slightly as he hit the gas. We'd barely driven a block when he made the first wrong turn. I blinked, trying to make sense of it. I think you missed the turn," I said, leaning forward slightly. The driver didn't even glance at me. "Shortcut," he muttered, his voice rough. I wasn't sure what he meant. Sure, there were some back roads around here, but I knew the area well enough to know that this wasn't a route that would take me home. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was a better way to avoid traffic, even though it was well past midnight. But then, after a few more turns, the streetlights began to fade away. The neighborhood was getting quieter, darker. There were no other cars around. It didn't feel right. "Hey," I said, my voice rising a little, "are you sure this is the right way?" He didn't answer, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. I was starting to feel a growing unease in the pit of my stomach. "This doesn't look like the way to my place. You want to get there or not?" He snapped, cutting me off. The harshness in his voice made me flinch, but I didn't speak up again. At that point, I was already second-guessing myself. Maybe I was overthinking it. I didn't want to make a scene, but my gut was telling me something was very, very wrong. I opened my phone and checked the app's map. My heart sank as I saw the little car icon moving farther away from my home. The path we were taking led straight toward the outskirts of town, toward industrial zones and empty lots. "Okay, seriously, I think you're going the wrong way," I said, my voice trembling. "Can you pull over and let me out?" He didn't respond. I tried again. "Hey, I said pull over." Suddenly, I heard the distinct sound of the door locks clicking into place. All the doors locked. My heart dropped into my stomach. I reached for the door handle, trying to get out, but it wouldn't budge. Panic started to surge through me. My breath was coming quicker, my pulse racing. "Let me out!" I screamed, hitting the window with my fists. No one was around. It felt like we were the only ones on the road. My hands were shaking as I pulled up the 911 app. I was about to hit dial when, out of nowhere, he reached over, snatched my phone, and slammed it onto the passenger seat. "Stop it," he growled, his grip tightening on the wheel. He shoved me back with one hand. "Be quiet now." I was trapped. I don't know where the strength came from, but a surge of adrenaline coursed through me. My hands were shaking, but I wasn't about to just sit there and let him take me wherever he wanted. I kicked the window with everything I had. It was a desperate, frantic move, but I didn't care. I needed out. The first crack came almost immediately. I kicked again, harder this time. Finally, the window shattered. Glass sprayed across the seat, but I didn't hesitate. I threw myself forward, clutching my bag to my chest, and crawled through the broken window. I hit the ground hard, my knees scraping against the asphalt, but I didn't stop. I scrambled to my feet and took off, running as fast as I could, not daring to look back. My legs burned with every step. I didn't know where I was running, just that I needed to get away. A few blocks later, I saw headlights coming toward me, and I waved my arms frantically. The car slowed and stopped. The driver, a woman in her 30s, rolled down the window. I was shaking so badly I could barely get the words out, but she took one look at me and opened the door. I collapsed into the front seat, and she immediately dialed the police. When the authorities arrived, I gave them everything I could remember: the car, the driver's description, the route we'd taken. They tried to track him down, searched the area, and checked nearby cameras. But despite their efforts, he was gone, vanished without a trace. I'm lucky I got out when I did. I don't even want to think about what could have happened if I hadn't. Now, every time I order an Uber, I triple check everything: the name, the face, the license plate, because I learned the hard way: you never know who's really behind the wheel. And trust me, you don't want to find out the hard way. It was a quiet night, too quiet. The city lights were dimming, and the usual hum of Los Angeles had fallen into an eerie silence. I'd just finished drinks with friends at a downtown bar, a normal end to a normal evening, except for one thing: my car had been in the shop for a week. I had no choice but to rely on Uber. I was tired, anxious, and something about the whole situation felt wrong the moment I stepped outside. It was around 11:30 p.m. The walk to the pickup spot wasn't far, but the streets were completely deserted. The usual hum of city life had disappeared, replaced by an eerie quiet. A slight breeze whispered through the empty street, and it sent a chill down my spine. I tried to shake it off. This was LA, after all. I'd be home soon enough. The Uber arrived right on time. A gray sedan with tinted windows. The driver's name on the app was listed as Dave, and his profile picture showed a man in his late 40s, clean-cut and neat. But when the window rolled down, I immediately noticed something off. The guy behind the wheel was younger, maybe in his mid-30s, with a scruffy beard, dark circles under his eyes, and messy hair that looked like it hadn't seen a comb in days. He was wearing a hoodie, even though it was warm outside, and his whole demeanor seemed off. For a moment I hesitated. I'd read the safety warnings in the Uber app 1,000 times. Always verify the name, the car, the license plate. The license plate checked out. Maybe the photo was outdated, or maybe this was some mix-up with the account. Whatever it was, I was too tired to question it further. Emily? His voice was low and a little too rough. Yeah, I said, sliding into the back seat, trying not to show how nervous I felt. The car smelled faintly of smoke. Cigarettes? Maybe. And something chemical, like cleaning supplies or air freshener trying to mask the stench. I buckled my seatbelt, unsure if I was more tired or more uneasy. Either way, I was too far into the ride to back out now. As the car pulled away from the curb, I noticed he wasn't using the app to navigate. His eyes were fixed on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "Do you need me to put the directions in?" I asked, instinctively checking my phone to see the route. "Nah," he muttered. "I know a shortcut." A chill ran down my spine. I knew this area well. There was no shortcut to my apartment, at least none that made sense at this hour. "Are you sure this is the right way?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Without saying a word, he turned the car down a narrow street that I didn't recognize. Then another turn. The buildings around us grew darker, emptier. We were in some industrial area now. Empty warehouses, dimly lit streets, chain-link fences closing in around us. "I don't think this is right," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "This isn't the way to my house." He didn't answer right away. He just muttered, "Relax. We'll get there." My stomach churned. The darkness outside seemed to stretch on forever. The streetlights flickered as if they, too, were uncertain of their purpose. I checked my Uber app again, but this time, the little car icon on the map wasn't following my route anymore. It was just drifting aimlessly across the screen. My heart started pounding in my chest. "This isn't my route," I said, louder now. "You're going the wrong way." He glanced at me in the rearview mirror. His expression was cold, unreadable. "I know what I'm doing," he snapped. "You want to get home or not?" His tone sent a jolt of fear through me. I gripped my phone tighter, my thumb trembling as I typed a quick message to a friend. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. The driver's phone, mounted on the dashboard, was open to a messaging app. He was typing, glancing down at the screen every few seconds while driving. I leaned forward, trying to make out the message without being obvious. The last message read, "Got the package. 10 min out. Package." A wave of panic crashed over me. Was he talking about me? Was this just a coincidence? My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation, but nothing felt right. The car stopped at a red light and my pulse raced. This might be my only chance. I didn't think twice. "Let me out," I said, my voice as firm as I could manage, though my hands were trembling. He didn't even look at me. No. A cold shiver shot through my spine. I reached for the door handle. It was manual, no child safety locks. Simple. If I acted quickly enough, I could escape. As soon as the light turned green, I yanked the door open and jumped. The ground slammed against me as I tumbled out, landing hard on the pavement. My knees scraped, but I didn't stop. I scrambled to my feet and ran, my breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. Behind me, the car screeched to a halt. The door slammed open. I didn't dare look back. I bolted toward the nearest gas station, my heart pounding in my chest. I screamed for help, and the attendant inside rushed to the door when he saw me running toward him, panic written all over my face. "What happened?" he asked, his voice tense. I think I was just almost kidnapped," I gasped, trying to catch my breath. "A guy in an Uber, he was taking me off route. I don't know what he was planning. You have to call the police." Without hesitation, the attendant pulled out his phone and dialed the police, his face going pale as he listened to my frantic explanation. By the time the officers arrived, the gray sedan was gone. They took my statement and began their investigation. Turns out, the account tied to the ride had been hacked. The car didn't even belong to the driver, and the registration came back to someone else entirely. But despite their efforts, they were unable to find him. I'll never forget how close I came to something far worse. I couldn't shake the feeling that this had been a setup, a carefully executed plan designed to lure unsuspecting passengers into danger. The thought of how easily it could have gone differently still haunts me. I'm Jake, a 27-year-old who moved to California a few years ago to chase the dream. My days are spent hustling at a tech startup, but at night I'm behind the wheel, driving strangers through the neon-lit streets of LA. I know this city well. The shimmering skyline, the endless avenues, and the grimy alleyways where only the brave or the foolish venture. But that night, I wasn't prepared for the darkness that lurked just beneath the surface of the ordinary. It was a Friday night, close to midnight, when the ride request came through. I was parked outside a strip of bars near Silver Lake, hoping to get a decent fare to keep the night moving. The notification popped up on my phone. Pick up in 2 minutes. Passenger. The destination seemed normal enough. Just a short ride to a quiet residential area on the outskirts of town. No big deal. I drove a few blocks, parked in front of a modest house, and waited. There was no one around, just a faint hum of music from the nearby bars and the occasional whoosh of a passing car. I glanced over at the streetlight. It flickered, casting eerie shadows on the empty sidewalk. Then I saw him. A man in his late 30s, pacing back and forth in front of the house. He wore a faded hoodie and jeans, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. His movements were jerky, unnervingly erratic, like he was either high on something or hiding some kind of anxious energy. I instantly felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. When I rolled down the window, I called out, "Eric?" He stopped pacing and gave a quick, almost frantic nod. He opened the passenger door and slid into the front seat without a word. That was the first red flag. Most passengers prefer the back, especially when they don't know you. Something about that made me uneasy, but I tried not to overthink it. Maybe he was just one of those people who liked the front for whatever reason. You sure you don't want to sit in the back?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. "No, I like the front," he muttered in a flat voice, his eyes darting around like he couldn't settle on a spot to focus. I didn't press it. It was a short ride, after all. The sooner I got him to his destination, the sooner I could move on. But the tightness in my chest refused to ease. As he settled in, my eyes caught the small, coiled rope in his lap. A tight, uncomfortable feeling washed over me. Why the hell was he carrying rope? It could have been nothing. Maybe he was a camper or worked in construction, but something about the way his fingers gripped it made my heart skip a beat. "Where are we heading?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. He gave me an address, and I entered it into the GPS. The route took me toward a quieter, more isolated area on the outskirts of the city, a place with winding streets, not a lot of streetlights, and houses that looked abandoned or half-occupied. I pressed the gas pedal, trying to focus on the road. For the first few minutes, there was only the soft hum of the car engine and the occasional rustle of his breathing, but I could feel his eyes on me, sharp and unblinking, like he was studying every move I made. I tried to ignore it, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "You drive a lot at night?" he asked, his voice low and raspy. "Yeah, it's when most people need rides," I replied, keeping my gaze on the road. "You ever get scared?" he asked, tilting his head slightly, as if the question itself was a puzzle. I forced a laugh, trying to play it off. "Not really. Most people are just trying to get home after a night out." He didn't respond immediately. The silence between us stretched, heavy and uncomfortable. Finally, he muttered, almost to himself, "It's all part of it, you know. They watch." I glanced at him quickly, but his eyes were locked on the road ahead, his grip on the rope tightening ever so slightly. "Long night?" I asked, trying to change the subject. The vibe was starting to get weird, and I wanted to break the tension. "Yeah," he said, his voice cold and distant. "Had some stuff to take care of." My stomach tightened. There was something about the way he said it, so casual, so chilling, that set my nerves on edge. I checked the GPS. We were close, just 5 minutes away. I could handle 5 more minutes, right? That's when he started to mumble. At first, I couldn't make out the words. It sounded like he was speaking to someone. Something, maybe. His lips moved rapidly, and his voice became more erratic. "You okay, man?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady, but my heart was pounding in my chest now. Suddenly, he snapped his head toward me. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated. "You don't get it, do you? None of you get it." Before I could react, he lunged at me. His hand shot forward, and the rope, now wrapped around his fist, flew toward my neck. Panic surged through me as the rope tightened, squeezing the breath out of me. I swerved the car, trying to throw him off balance, but he wasn't letting go. His face was twisted with some kind of wild, manic energy as he screamed, "I have to do this! I have no choice! They're watching us! All of us!" My vision began to blur, and I struggled to breathe. My hands fumbled, grasping for the wheel, for anything that might save me. Without thinking, I slammed my foot on the gas. The car lurched forward, barreling toward a line of parked vehicles. I twisted the wheel at the last second, but the crash was inevitable. The airbags exploded into my face with a deafening pop, and the car jolted violently, throwing Eric forward. The rope went slack. I gasped, struggling to take in air. My hands were shaking as I yanked the seatbelt off and scrambled to push open the door. The world outside felt like a distant echo. Blurred faces, shouts, footsteps running toward me. People had seen the crash. They'd heard the commotion. Someone grabbed Eric, pulling him away from the car, while others checked on me. My head was spinning, but I heard the sirens, saw the flashing lights as the cops arrived. Eric was incoherent. He kept babbling about them and how it was the only way. When the police questioned him, they discovered he had a long history of mental illness and a string of prior arrests, including one for assault. I don't know how long I sat there, heart still racing, before they let me go. I still have a scar on my neck where the rope dug into my skin, and it's been weeks since that night. But I can't shake the feeling that I'm always looking over my shoulder. I tried to go back to driving for Uber, but I couldn't. Every time I sit behind the wheel, I hear that rope tightening all over again. I'll never forget his eyes or the terrifying certainty that for a moment, I might not have made it out alive. It was a warm night in downtown Los Angeles, and I was wrapping up at the office around 10 p.m. The streets were quieter than usual, but the city still hummed with the usual late-night traffic. I wasn't accustomed to taking ride shares at this hour. Normally, I'd have my own car, but mine was in the shop, and with no other way to get home, I had little choice. A bus ride wasn't an option. The thought of waiting at a lonely bus stop at this time of night didn't sit right with me. I opened the Uber app on my phone, and a car arrived in minutes. I wasn't thrilled about getting into a stranger's car at this hour, but it seemed like the only choice I had. I'm Clara Jensen, a 27-year-old marketing coordinator, just trying to make it home after a grueling day at work. I grew up in California, and even though Los Angeles has always felt like a second home, there are still times when the city can make you feel like you're just a small, lost speck in its vast, sprawling streets. And on that night, something about the way the streets emptied out as I climbed into the car made me feel smaller than ever. The driver, Rick, looked harmless enough, middle-aged, wearing a polo shirt and a neat, almost suburban vibe. He smiled when I climbed in, greeting me in that warm, friendly way that always makes you think, okay, this is fine. We made small talk about the weather and how LA traffic was being unusually kind to us, and for the first few minutes I didn't feel uncomfortable at all. Long day? He asked, his voice low and casual, as he navigated us through downtown. Yeah, you could say that, I replied, not thinking too much of it. His tone was easygoing, but something about his questions started to put me on edge. So, where exactly are you heading? You going home or meeting someone? He asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. The question wasn't particularly strange, but the way it came out felt a little off, too probing, too personal for a simple Uber ride. I hesitated, my usual instinct for privacy kicking in. Just heading home to relax, I answered vaguely, hoping that would be enough. Rick's eyes flicked to me in the mirror, and for a moment, his friendly smile seemed to falter just barely. He pressed on. Yeah, but where's home? What's your street? My gut twisted. I always set my drop-off point in the app as an intersection nearby, never my exact address, especially when traveling late at night. Oh, the app has it. Just near the intersection, I said quickly. A strange tension settled between us as Rick's voice shifted ever so slightly from casual to something more sharp. You don't trust me or something? I'm just trying to make sure I drop you off at the right spot. I forced a laugh, trying to shrug it off, but my heart rate had picked up. No, it's fine. The app's accurate. Thanks, though. The mood in the car shifted. The light chatter stopped, replaced by an uneasy silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that Rick was watching me through the rearview mirror, his gaze lingering a bit too long. My phone buzzed in my hand, a reminder of a text from my roommate, nothing important, just a reminder to pick up milk. I tried to refocus on something normal, anything to distract myself from the growing discomfort in the car. Then, without warning, Rick asked, "Do you live alone?" The question hung in the air like an electric charge. I could feel my pulse quicken. No. I have roommates, I replied, my voice shaky, trying not to sound alarmed. Rick didn't respond to that. He just nodded, and the silence became even more oppressive. My mind raced, and every instinct I had told me to get out. I glanced at the Uber map on my phone. We were supposed to be close to my drop-off point, but instead of making the usual left turn, Rick steered into an unfamiliar, dimly lit parking lot behind a strip mall. The lot was empty, just rows of old, abandoned cars. "Why are we stopping here?" I asked, my voice tight, a lump in my throat. Rick didn't answer right away. He pulled the car into a spot, switched off the engine, and then did something that froze me in place. He locked the doors with an audible click. When he turned to look at me, his expression was completely different. No longer the friendly suburban dad vibe I had first picked up. His face was cold, calculating. "Hand over your wallet and phone," he said, his voice low and menacing. My heart hammered in my chest, and for a second, I couldn't move. Fear surged through me, making it hard to breathe. I don't have cash," I stammered. "I can send you money through an app if that's what you want." Rick shook his head, impatience flashing across his face. "Wallet, phone, now." Everything inside me screamed to do something, anything. I slowly reached into my bag, pretending to grab my wallet. My fingers were shaking uncontrollably, but I knew I had to do something fast. I subtly pressed the unlock button on the door. There was a faint click, and I held my breath, praying he hadn't noticed. Without giving myself time to think, I flung open the door and bolted out of the car. My legs felt like jelly, but my body moved on pure adrenaline. I didn't look back. I just ran as fast as I could. My heart was racing, and I knew I had to get somewhere safe, fast. I spotted a brightly lit convenience store a few blocks away and made a beeline for it. The door chimed as I burst inside, and the clerk behind the counter looked up, startled by my frantic appearance. I didn't stop to explain. I just grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking so much I could barely hold the phone steady. "911? What's your emergency?" A calm voice answered. I quickly explained the situation, detailing the stolen car, the driver's threats, and the location. The dispatcher assured me help was on the way, and as I hung up, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't over, but I was safe, for now. The officers arrived swiftly, and I gave them every detail I could remember. The car model, the license plate, Rick's name. But when they ran the plate, they found it wasn't even registered to him. The car had been stolen. A couple of days later, the police called me back. They had tracked down Rick. Turns out he wasn't just an Uber driver. He had been using fake profiles on rideshare apps to target vulnerable passengers, mostly women traveling alone at night. I still think about that night, about how close I came to losing everything. It was a close call, one that still makes my blood run cold. I don't take rideshares anymore unless it's absolutely necessary, and even then I triple check every detail. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return.